Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think it's finally safe to say good afternoon to all of us in all time zones. This is Alicia Pike from Iowa. I'm going to be your host for this session. We welcome those of you who are just joining us to the first ever Multi-State Virtual Staff Development Day. Those of you who have been with us throughout the day, welcome back. This event is supported through funding from the Colorado State Library, the Georgia Public Library Service, the State Library of Iowa, and the Maryland State Library, with assistance from the Library Services and Technology Act through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Just have a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We will record this session and archive it. You will get a link from us next week that has access to the archive sessions. We know that some of you like to watch in groups, so if you are with some folks who haven't registered, please let us know how many you have in the room with you so that we can keep accurate attendance records. That helps us when we are advocating for doing this event again next year, which we really hope we'll be able to do. You do have the opportunity to chat us questions. There are two places to do that. You should see a general chat area, and you can choose to send those chats to all of the participants in the room. And then there's also a Q&A area where questions will just go to the panelists and hosts. And we will try to address all of those questions at the end of the presentation. You will get continuing education credit for this session and all of the sessions you attend today. There will be a follow-up survey that includes a certificate of attendance at the end of it. So this afternoon, we're honored to have Dr. Clara Chu back with us. Hopefully some of you were able to attend her opening session this morning. This afternoon, she's going to discuss how libraries contribute to the collective action and impact worldwide to promote peaceful and sustainable communities. Dr. Chu is the director of the Mortensen Center for International Library Programs. At the Mortensen Center, she coordinates projects that address libraries for peace and services to refugees. So now I'm going to turn things back over to you, Dr. Chu. Thank you so much for being with us again today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alicia, and good afternoon to everyone. And again, I wanted to thank Nini Deegan for her invitation and coordination, and Dorcas Davis for her technical support. And of course, to the four state library units that have come together to work on this and present this very unique professional development opportunity. And I hope that it is the first of many to come. And so I wanted to start off with this slide. And this slide, you may not be able to see the top very well, but what I usually do when we start off a workshop with this particular topic, people have maybe different interpretations of what community library interaction could mean. And community library interactions that drive social transformation. So I thought as I start off the session, if you could type in some of your particular ideas, how would you respond to this question? What does community library interaction, so that represents the acronym CLIA, what does that mean in terms of action that drives social transformation? So if you wanted to write it down, so as you're listening to me chat and share some of the background regarding this, then you can type in some potential responses. Okay, so let me repeat. What does community library interaction that drives social transformation? What does that mean to you? Okay. So let me get going. So we started this project, and this project started off first as library community interaction. And as we were co-developing the guide, then one of the librarians from Baltimore County, she said, oh, you know, if we're talking about community, how come we have community second? And so that's when we decided that we would switch the order, and now this process that we are inviting libraries to engage in is called CLIA, Community Library Interaction. So a little bit of background. What this project does, it responds to community needs by supporting libraries to facilitate local dialogue and community action. So that means that everything starts right there within your library. So whether your library is a public library, school, university, any library has a community. And so in this context, your particular library would be able to contribute to the collective action and impact on the part of libraries worldwide to advance peaceful and sustainable communities. So as different libraries around the world are engaging in this CLIA process, then collectively we can say that we're working together to address and empower communities, and that we can learn from each other. And this particular work done the Mortensen Center in collaboration with the Research Cluster, which is at the University of Lincoln. The University of Lincoln's Take Part initiative has worked for many years on grant-funded projects where they are able to have communities learn about active citizenship. How is it that they can be empowered to act on actions and concerns that they have to be able to enhance their lives, the community's lives, and then overall social transformation in their particular area. And so this means that this process allows libraries to play a meaningful role in supporting community capacity building for social transformation. And we are working on addressing 3 core values. So the core values are democratic dialogue, because conversations take place, and then social cohesion, inclusion, equality, and diversity. And so this means that through the conversation and the action that one would take together, then this allows inclusion to take place, equality, and diversity. And because libraries are supporting this activity, form these groups are working together and gathering information, then it leads to informed civil and civic action. And so when you look at images that you see before you, then one usually can see, this is a library environment that you're probably very familiar with. You can see there are library users using computers. There is a group of young people with an older person reading a book, literacy taking place, people studying together, and so forth. And so you see libraries that are busy for the most part. You see libraries that are being used, libraries that are doing a pretty good job of supporting their communities through their services, programs, collections. And so the question that we ask ourselves in the CLIA project is, what do these individuals know about each other? Does a person that's sitting, next to another person, have they ever talked? Do they know what their common concerns are? If we brought them together and invited them to get to know each other, will that help to increase cohesion in the community? Will it help them identify issues of concern and then empower them to act on it? So one of the things we want to do is to not just have services for people, but to work on services with people. And so the images here is allowing us to have a new way to look at our users in terms of not individuals using our resources or individuals doing a particular task such as studying together. The top images are of a university library, and then the bottom images are of a public library. So to do to engage in activities that are beyond just the reading and maybe homework and looking up information that many of our users are quite comfortable doing. So the way that we've been developing this project is through 3 phases. we wanted to co-develop this project with the individuals that will be involved in such a process like CLIA. So we had our first lab to co-develop the guide in the United States at the University of Illinois, and then we went to Colombia to work with the libraries there. The reason that we went to Colombia is because we want this process to be, and the guide to be available and to be used internationally. But more important, Colombia is undergoing a peace process. As a country, it signed a peace accord, and a couple of days before we delivered and engaged in the lab in Colombia, all the guerrilla fighters were able to turn in their weapons to the United Nations. So it is now in a process where none of the guerrilla fighters are using their weapons. They're starting to integrate with the community. And so what does it mean when you have communities where individuals fled particular dangerous zones, conflict zones, to be in a safer neighborhood? And now the guerrilla fighters who were the ones that were creating that insecurity are now joining the community. So what role does a library have to play with that? And one of the things you'll see when you look up Colombia and libraries, you do see that libraries are quite engaged in providing information, in providing technology, mobile libraries, and so forth. And so what we are encouraging librarians to do is to use a more integrative approach to be able to have impact with their community and for community to engage in a process where they can learn about each other and to have more cohesion within the community. And so the third phase is where we launch the guide, and then libraries around the world can have the opportunity to use the guide and hold conversations where they will be able to have their communities and support their communities to take action on issues that are of collective concern. And so this chart shows you the kinds of groups that we wanted to bring together. So if we had an academic library group, we wanted somebody from library management, one person from library staff, one volunteer from the library, a community member, and then a community organization member. And so there was one team for the lab that took place in the United States. There was one team from the Baltimore County Public Library. There was one team from the Oak Park Public Library, and then the other two teams, one from the University Library here at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and a team from the Information Sciences program at the university. And so we've been wanting to bring teams together that are representing both community and staff, because those are the constituents that will be working together, and we wanted to learn what are the experiences that they have that is working well, and in which ways could their communication, the working relationships improve. And so in terms of how public libraries can be involved in engaging the community, then there is the work that has been written by a library and information science faculty member of Columbia, who talks about the public library specifically, but I think that this can be applied to any library, where the library becomes a space that allows the community to learn to know and to act together and to live together. And so by being able to engage with each other in new ways, then they are able to awaken civic engagement, find things that they can collectively engage and participate in, and then foster a greater degree of intervention in the decision-making processes and solving community problems. So there's dialogue, there's action, and problem solving that leads to social transformation. So one of the things that's important as we developed the guide was, do we have a shared understanding of what needs to go in the guide? And since the scope is international, then we had, during our first lab in the United States, three different note takers. One took notes in Spanish, one in Chinese, and one in English, to allow us to see if we were all listening to similar things, we were getting input, and what would the language look like to describe many of the issues that were brought up when it comes to writing out the guide. And some of the characteristics that we identified in a process that would be community library interaction is that it's not prescriptive and it's not goal-oriented, meaning we're not coming together because we already know the reason that we want to come together is we want to develop better nutrition programs for children, let's say. And so it's coming together, identifying the concerns, and then identifying what one wants to work on. And so the conversation creates communication, and what happens when we understand the issues that are of concern and that the community might want to address is we begin to understand the reasons that maybe there are certain barriers that are created by a system, by our organizations, our policies, our government, and then what is it that we need to know and what skills do we need to change what is creating a barrier for us. And so part of this process is that we learn to think and articulate in order to produce results. I asked at the beginning, before I launched into this presentation, a particular question. So I asked, what does community library interaction mean that drives social transformation? So I'm going to check to see some of your particular responses. So having programs that benefit the community. So that really speaks to the fact that even though you're working on particular concerns of a group, that then it expands out, that it does reach. So the social transformation is important. And then it does also emphasize what Christina says, which is outreach, meaning that libraries are not waiting for community to come to it, but libraries are aware that it's a two-way process, that they would be working with communities and listening and partnering with them, and that with the work that we can do is best done if we can tap into knowledge that we may not have in-house. And libraries, again, are a great place to do this, as indicated by David, where he indicates that libraries are safe and neutral places. So that means that communities, once we start this process and we invite them in, that then they consider libraries, librarians especially, as partners, and that they can use the library space as a place where they can connect with other members who have something in common with them. And social interaction is important. And then the conversation, as indicated by Andrea, is that the conversation leads to getting to know each other so you work together. So it's not, again, just conversation, but something where we end up getting to know each other through action. Being a community hub is important in terms of the work of the library. And so we can see that it's a different change in terms of mindset of the way that libraries are working with our community, instead of just delivering what it is that they may express, that now we are really engaged not to always deliver and solve a problem, but to ask the community, what is it that you yourself would like and how would you approach it? Is it something that you want to take action on rather than necessarily the library always taking action? And so all of your ideas that you've indicated are really on target and are addressing different aspects of this particular process, community, library, which is two different sectors coming together and doing the kind of engagement that leads to action that can create change. And so one of the things we did during the lab is try to decide how would we define community library interaction. So we defined it in terms of three different areas, which is that First, it allows libraries to strengthen their role as community anchors or anchor institutions by working with. So not just for the communities, but also with them. And so we're supporting them and acting collectively, uh, supporting them to act collectively rather than having them act in that isolation. So this means that we are ensuring that communities can be that community that they want to be. The next, that we are uh, engaging mindful practices that facilitate participatory dialogue and community action, contributing towards advancing social justice, inclusion, and equity. So that means that when you're advancing inclusion and equity, that means that community members feel that they belong, that then they become part of something, become part of an active citizenship process. And then the last is that CLIA processes support movements towards social transformation and contribute to the collective action and impact on the part of libraries worldwide to advance peaceful and sustainable communities. That means that not only do communities feel that they belong to the community and that they are part of the community, but they can become more, that the community can be richer and be better in different ways, whether it's economically, it's culturally, any way that they may decide to act on it. So I talked about this concept of community anchor, and so some of you may already be familiar with what anchor institutions are. So generally defined, anchor institutions are nonprofit institutions that tend to be established or rooted in a community, support local economies, and contribute to community development. So these are not businesses which, may open up and then when there's no longer a market for what they're selling or what they're offering, then they move away, close shop, and so forth. Libraries, hospitals, educational institutions, and so forth are anchor institutions. And in a recent, the American Library Association, they were able to determine that libraries of all types are viewed as anchors, centers for academic life and research, and cherished spaces. So not only are libraries community anchors, but they also are social anchors. That means that they address the social fabric of the community. So how is it that communities are engaged in their own empowerment and their own ability to act? So we can have a community member who is just existing, meaning that person lives in the community and they're not necessarily thinking that there are particular issues that they need to address or are concerned with. Then there are others who are more engaged. They may find that they want to contribute and they may volunteer and become informed about an issue, and they want to know, why is it that something is happening. Then you have those who are active citizens, and those are the ones that we would like to get to the library to participate, so then they go from becoming just a member of the community to being an active citizen where they recognize that there are issues and they make it a priority to become part of community and social change. And so looking at it another way, then there is what is called the levels of community engagement. And so again, when you're just a member, you can just be passive, and that means that you might have some information about issues, and then as you become more actively engaged, then you want to work with others to influence change. You start to identify priorities, and you want to, and you're invested in ensuring that there's certain areas that become the priorities and that they are the ones that you're working with. And so libraries then are supporting because they provide information at every single level of community engagement. And where we would like the CLIA process to be able to do is that we are able to support and we are able to encourage our community members to become leaders, that they are the ones that actually initiate and lead and are able to create change in their communities. So we provide the space and we help to support and lead any efforts, but the initiative and the decision making comes from the leaders of the community, the members of the community. And so the process of community library interaction again enables libraries to strengthen the role of themselves as community anchors by working with and not just for communities. Okay? So another concept that we wanted to introduce as part of the CLIA process is what is described as social innovation. And that is a novel solution to a social problem that is more effective, efficient, sustainable, or just than just current solutions. So that means that libraries and communities may already be working to address their issues, but hopefully with the information that libraries can provide, with more people coming and looking at an issue together, then they can find new ways to bring about a solution, and people who have different areas of expertise that can bring not only a new perspective, but new skills and knowledge to the table. And so to just describe what community engagement is, it's a process where different members of community would work together collaboratively. And how is it that that community is defined? That community can be defined because they live close to each other, geographic proximity. They may have this special interest. They're all interested in the environment, or they have similar situations that they wish to address. Maybe they are all single mothers or unemployed, so there may be just issues that they recognize that they hold in common. And so by coming together, they can address environmental and bring about also behavioral changes that improve the well-being of that community and its members. And so they're able to mobilize resources, influence systems, change relationships among partners, and serve as catalysts for changing policies, programs, and practices. So as you can see, libraries, by participating in CLIA, then are not just having the communities come for a conversation, but are really encouraging, serving as a catalyst for them to create social change. And this is part of our broader Libraries for Peace initiative at the Mortensen Center, which I described earlier this morning. And for some of you, it was earlier in the afternoon. And so for some of you who might want to know more about the Libraries for Peace process or our initiative, I invite you to visit the website. And so the Libraries for Peace initiative, as well as Community Library Interaction, CLIA, is part of a process that is described by two Stanford professors as collective impact. So to not expand too much on this, since I spoke about it this morning, and you have a chance to read more about it if you are able to go and do a search on the topic collective impact and libraries, you will see that it's a process where to be able to tackle the challenging issues in society, organizations or individuals cannot work alone. And if we're looking at organizations such as libraries, if libraries just coexist, then they're not tapping and mobilizing their resources. And by communicating and understanding what each of us might be doing to address particular issues or to support our community, then we can begin to collaborate, coordinate, or cooperate. So these are different levels of engagement to at some point build so much trust in each other that we can then offer integrated programs, that we can plan for them together, we can contribute our different funding sources or find funding sources together. And so by working together, as some libraries have done, there are examples of libraries such as the Pascaville Partnership, where the public library has been engaged with 10 community-based organizations and city agencies to address the needs of the job seeker in their community. So these are either individuals who may be looking for a better job or, for the most part, may be unemployed. So underemployed or unemployed. And so this particular partnership has led to identifying a greater need, and so the greater need is currently being supported by a project that's funded by the IMLS. And so one can start working together and see that by identifying something that works across the community, then one can hopefully find funding sources that will be able to address the solutions that have been identified as needed. I wanted to share a particular case when we brought the different library groups together to develop the guide. Then we wanted to learn from them whether they've already participated in a similar process, and if they have, then to share those cases with us. So when we publish the CLIA guide, that we have some cases and libraries are able to understand how the process might work. And so we have here the example from Baltimore County. And what Baltimore County was able to do is they wanted to be able to respond to the distrust that communities have of police. Because as we know, there have been shootings of young African men by police, and then the distrust in the community because they don't necessarily see why it is that they occurred and that justice may be done. And so the Baltimore County Public Library wanted to bring community together to develop a healing process. And that healing process would involve bringing the police together, bringing community members that represent those who may be victims or have worked in community relations or may have experience working with the police, and then also the community members themselves. And so what is described in this case is that this process is not so easy. The process to first engage in addressing a challenging topic that hopefully by putting together the effort that is needed, then and being very sensitive to the kind of discussion that one needs to have, that it does lead to the potential healing and the kind of opening up for further engagement that is needed in a community. And so it was a challenging process trying to work with different community organizations, different community representatives, different community leaders, the police, and then generally just to open it up. And so one of the concerns that was raised was if it becomes, a yelling match, if it becomes a blaming situation, then it would be very difficult for the police to want to be part of this process. So there were some rules of engagement that were addressed and stipulated, which is that this was to allow concerns to be raised, that it wasn't about criticizing or blaming, but about listening, raising concerns, and ensuring that these were voiced so then there could be a reduction of distrust. So the challenges that were raised was working and trying to get the groups to come on board, trying to find a time when everybody could meet, and then bringing this meeting about. The meeting was well attended. There was rich discussion in terms of many concerns that were shared. And so one of the experiences that's coming out of this is that it was a successful program. It did bridge some gaps, but because coming together with the different organizations takes a lot of time, then they are in a place where they know that this worked well. They're looking forward to the next opportunity to engage. And so this is something that is still in process. The participants are interested in seeing what might be the next opportunity to come together. And so this is something that either we can have the communities be more involved in terms of volunteering to take part in organizing, so we can encourage this as librarians, or we can try to see how we might work with the volunteers that we already have to see how we may move this process forward. And so these kinds of engagements where there is healing to be done and there is potential distress does take work. And so it's more valuable that we try to put the effort, and we don't necessarily have to worry about necessarily the frequency of these programs, but to know that the community is aware that we are committed to such processes, that we want to continue them, and to invite them to be part of this process. And so with CLIA at your library, if you could now take, while I'm talking and describing a little bit about CLIA at your library, if you can write in the chat box a potential case, meaning, you know, who might be involved in what your library is, if you were to invite a community group or a sector of your community, okay, which library are you, and who is it that you would invite to your community, and then why is it that you feel that this might be a group that you want to work with? You know, is there something that you are concerned about, or do you know that there is some issue taking place in your community? And so by working with this particular group, it's an indicator of potential social transformation that might take place after the conversation. So I invite you to share with others your particular library and the kind of conversation with the community that you might want to start. And so with the CLIA process, the first thing that needs to happen is for the library to decide that they want to engage in this process, that this process is unique in its emphasis on empowering community and social transformation. And so with identifying the case in terms of the contribution and engagement with the CLIA process, if they've already been involved in such a case, then we invited libraries to share those cases. If they haven't been involved, as many of you may not be involved in this, then who is it that you might want to work with? Okay, so currently I'm not seeing anyone in the chat writing any ideas, but I'll continue and then we'll come back and revisit. Okay, so CLIA, very much like the experience in the Baltimore County Public Library, it really asks libraries to take the time, make the commitment to do this kind of work that will take the energy and commitment that might not be typical. But I think that when we get to know our communities this way, that we find that it is, and it can be rewarding. And so, first of all, if we want to work with a particular group, let's say we decide that we want to work with disabled senior citizens, we may find that we recognize that our community has a lot of, maybe we're somewhere where it's warm, and so we have more and more seniors living with us in our community, but we haven't really worked with them. So how do we cultivate those relationships where we find who to invite? Maybe one way is that we see a few people already coming every other day, and so we can invite them to invite their friends. And so we have to see that these are ways to open up new opportunities. And then what are those challenges? If we don't know the community or community organizations that represent them, then are we right in starting with few, or do we have to get it all correct by ensuring to invite a representative group? And so there are no clear answers in the CLIA process, meaning what's important is that commitment to start somewhere. And so as long as the process is authentic and that you are open to engaging and trying, then that's and open to any of the challenges that might come about, then that's the best attitude that one can have. And so how do you promote this across your library? So the way that one would promote this is to not assign this to just to one person, to not just assign it to the outreach librarian, but to be able to uh, bring this up in a meeting of the library staff. So then everybody understands what's involved. Why is it that we want to be able to do this? Why is it that we want to try it out? We may find that, it does take too much time, but is it worth trying to really get a sense of understanding our communities? And so getting started, connecting with your community, and knowing whether it will just take one community conversation and then that community will really come together and then they decide on their own all their next steps. So the community that comes together for the first time, maybe they already are feeling so well connected that they are able to schedule their future meetings. They can identify what they want to work on, and they have the library involved in terms of scheduling rooms and things like that, but the library might not need to get as involved. Or in which situations do we find that the library needs to get more involved because that first meeting was just to get to know each other. They didn't get very far in terms of identifying common areas that they want to work on. They just began to understand each other. And so these steps are important, and then future work with them is to ensure that we don't ever take the reins, meaning, let us find this for you, let us do everything for you, but it's about them being involved in the decision-making process. Okay, so I'm going to look at some examples. So I see that there is interest in working with homeless patrons, and that this is being done with Volunteers of America. I see other examples of work the Atlanta Regional Commission on a program that focuses on chronic disease and self-management. Okay, so what might happen in this situation now that you have an audience that has attended this class, then to invite them to have a conversation that is not focused on teaching them something, but is focused on them getting to know each other. And then do they have certain concerns where they might have additional needs that may not have been covered in class, particular concerns that they would like to tackle because they're not getting specific types of information or services. And so these are all things that we want to do, okay? And so I'm going to continue with the presentation, and I'm looking forward to be able to review the information that you've all shared and be able to learn about the great things that you're doing or some of the communities that you're going to begin to engage with. So sustaining CLIA may be very easy for some communities that are smaller and they already have wonderful relationships with their community. It may be more difficult with larger communities if you find that the library is so busy focused on delivering certain services and they haven't had a time to engage and to do the kind of work where you go out to the community and get to know the organizations that represent different groups or the groups themselves. So that's critical. So something that I indicated was that this should be a process-driven approach rather than necessarily goal-driven. And also within the library, we need to identify who is going to provide leadership for this process and to not think about outreach, because one of the things that was brought up in the lab development is that our communities are part of us and we are part of the community. And so to use other terms like community engagement or something else, but not necessarily outreach. Even though that's the term that we have been used to using, maybe it's time to rethink the word that we use that really allows us to build relationships and have that ongoing engagement. And so tools and resources we know are needed, and we'll be providing those on the website. And the guide is going to be one that allows different application in different contexts. So it's not going to be a guide that is going to have a lot of detail, but it's going to be more giving a framework and a structure. And so each community can try the process, and since asking communities to do is to participate in a year-long process, and in this particular way, we're able to support the libraries that are applying this particular approach. And then for those who are having challenges, or for those who are having successes, that you be able to join our monthly meetings and share your concerns and share your successes through a virtual classroom approach, very much similar to the system that we're using. The one that we have would allow you to be able to connect in smaller rooms if we wanted to have small group discussions, or you would be able to use voice chat. And one of the things that we want to be able to do is to measure the impact of CLIA. And so the way that we're doing it is not so much necessarily, the counting the successes or anything like that, but it's more about what did each community learn, and then what did each library community identify as barriers and opportunities. So it's more process driven. Then we wanted to now share with you a little bit in terms of next steps and commitments. What we are going to be doing is publishing or launching the guide, and we are inviting those who want to join part of the process, as well as those who have been lab participants, to come on a journey with us for a year. And we invite you, for those who can, to join the monthly virtual meetings, where it will be 2 hours. 1 hour will be in English. The second hour will potentially be in a different language. So then those in other communities can then also be learning from each other and about the process in a language, non-English language that they may understand. And so one of the follow-ups that we're doing is going back to Colombia, and in person we'll be having a one-day conference where the libraries that have had the opportunities to put CLIA in practice are able to not just share information during virtual monthly meetings, but for them to be able to see and talk with each other about what it is that they've been able to achieve, or what their experiences have been up to this point. And so in order for libraries to be able to learn from each other and identify who is already doing this work, then we are inviting libraries to add that they are involved in this process and are trying this out with their community, and to put their library on the map. And so all the different efforts are being mapped through Libraries for Peace. If you're engaging in CLIA, you can add your library. If you are participating in other Libraries for Peace efforts, such as International Day of Peace, you can also add your library to the map. And so the CLIA journey will be a publication of different cases, the experiences that libraries have had along this journey of a year, and to be able to share with one another what the process has been for them. So this is where I end sharing information about CLIA. And so one of the things that is always fruitful and learning process for us is to be able to hear from you. If you can describe in one word what the CLIA process, how you respond to it, or what does it mean to you. And you don't necessarily have to write why if you don't want to, but if you can describe CLIA, how would you describe it in terms of what it might mean for your library? So it's finished in terms of my presentation, and so I'm very interested in learning from you what it is that a CLIA process might mean for your library. Okay, that's great. All the different things are being shared. Wonderful. So I'm hoping that through the multi-state collaboration that's taking place, that it might be a way for us to be able to find a way that maybe libraries from the 4 states could join and maybe a particular set of libraries share experiences together, that you might want to be the focus of a particular monthly conversation and share your experiences with other libraries around the world. So if the uh, coordinators of this particular conference are interested in how you might be able to identify libraries that are working on this and the focal point for a broader sharing process with libraries around the world, I would be happy to work with you and to do any kind of follow-up process and any kind of support that your particular libraries might need.
Thank you, Clara. That's a wonderful idea. And I think one of the benefits of having this collaboration with the day here is that we, libraries from our states represent different communities, but different communities that have a lot in common. And I've been noticing that from the comments in the chat. And I don't know, obviously, where people are from in other states, but I do recognize some of the names from Iowa, and seeing some of their comments are very similar to people working in libraries in large cities. So that's always interesting for me to see the similarities between us.
Great. So are there any questions or concerns or just any comments from anyone?
I'm not seeing any questions in Q&A. I see additional thoughtful comments, though. I really am impressed by all of the reflection that people have done in this session.
That's wonderful. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I do see a question about the time frame for the completion of the guide.
Oh, so the guide will be available in September. And so we were hoping that it would be the end of August, but as most things go, there are many other things that one has to take care of. So since this collaboration is international, then with the various responsibilities, now we are going to have the guide coming out sometime in September. And to continue to be involved, I see the question, we're going to post all our meetings on our website. And so if you go to the CLIA website, so I don't have it here, it was right, I'm going to go back to the, okay, one more back. Okay, so if you go to the CLIA page, then we will be listing our monthly conversations. If you would like to be specifically engaged and be part of a presentation, then please let me know. And especially, I think people learn really well when we have cases, when you can bring up something that may not have worked and maybe you want some ideas of how others might handle it. That's what part of this year-long learning process is about. We want not for experts to come in and help us, but we want each of us as librarians and library staff to be able to help each other, because we know that the knowledge and the skills are housed right there where we are at. They're not very far from the library walls.
I do also see a question about training facilitators for difficult community discussions and whether your organization provides guidelines or resources to help with that.
So currently we don't have anything specific, but these are the areas we know that are going to come up. So the guide that we develop is not going to be static. What we're going to have are libraries that try it out. If there's sections that need further development, then we'll develop whether it's practice, tips or other kinds of information. We will ask libraries who are involved if they've found good, positive, or productive ways to do something, then to share that information with us. So this process is a conversation that we know we don't have specific answers for. How do we have conversations in all the different communities that may exist? And so it's up to us to just have a sense of commitment and know that if we are open to a conversation and open to sharing our resources, that something will come about where we really will get to know each other and there's opportunity to really build those relationships. So libraries, instead of thinking that we need to defend our role in the community will know that we're already there for them. And so this is a switching of how we are just a natural part of a community and we don't really need to make a case for why is it that the community should care about us, but the community is making a case that we are already part of what is making it rich, what's making it be the kind of thriving community that it is.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Chu, for being here today twice. We really appreciate your time and everything that you've shared with us, and thanks to those of you who joined us again in this past hour. If you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to contact your state continuing education coordinator, although you're getting contact information for our presenters as we go along here too, and I am sure that they welcome questions directly from you. Just a reminder, if you have to leave at this point and can't join us for the last hour, once you leave the webinar, you should be taken to a survey, and that last page of the survey is an attendance certificate for continuing education credit. And if you don't see that, we will send the link to everybody who's registered through email. So we just have a couple of minutes before our next session, Choose to Be Kind, Building Community Through the Exchange of Empathy. And that will start at 2 p.m. Mountain Time, 3 p.m. Central, and 4 p.m. Eastern Time.